Hello, Meg podcast listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Meg podcast. Again, we've had a bit of a delay between the last one and this one, but as ever, it's real life gets in the way. And apparently Matt was saving his employer's IT system or something from something. It's all very technical. Apparently involved a hammer.
So. Plausible deniability. That's what I'm going for.
Anyway, usual team here tonight, as well as myself. We've got Matt and Richard Jeffrey Cook. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Good evening.
So the subject of tonight's podcast, I'm going to keep saying tonight because that's when we're recording it, will be the career, the military history of Janos Hunyadi, and therefore Hungary around that time, the 15th century, if I've got my centuries right. For once, Richard is getting a night off. He's not going to be leading us with the history, and we're going to hand over to Matt, who I think, as many of you know, has a real interest in Eastern Europe, and can probably talk about it. But he's promised to keep it reasonably manageable tonight. So, as we always say, without further ado, actually, a little further ado, because after that we will look at after Matt's done his bit, we will look at some armies from the period that relate to the history Matt's going to go through, as normal. So, and now, without further ado, over to Matt to lay his pearls of wisdom before us.
Thank you, Nick. Well, let's see how I do. Right. Where to start? Well, I could start at the beginning, but we'd be here for quite a while. So, let's write. 15th century saw Central and Eastern Europe turned into basically a cockpit of wars. Yeah, I knew I was going to fall over on that one. Shifting alliances, religious and political turmoil, from the Hussite revolutions of Bohemia, Hungarian civil wars, Polish expansionism, the Italian wars, Turkish land grabs in northern Greece, Serbia and Moldavia. It was a mess. And as always with these kind of things, talented people rise to the top. So since 1385, start with Hungary, 1385, it had been ruled by King Sigismund, of the Crusade of Nicopolis fame, Holy Roman Emperor, protagonist of the Hussites, all-round Germanic good guy. As the story goes, one of his Hungarian court knights was a Transylvanian nobleman called Wojak, and he was rewarded for loyal service with the estates of Castle Hunyadi in the Transylvanian area. And there in 1409, his son Janos Hunyadi was born. The young Hunyadi would later have a younger brother. Well, he couldn't have had an older brother. Anyway, he had a younger brother who was also known as Janos Hunyadi. So there's the elder and the younger, just for confusion's sake, basically. So in the chronicles, they both turn up, and often they weren't distinguished, which makes for some interesting reading. But anyway, so from about 1427 to 1437, it's quite well recorded that Janos managed a world-class practical military education. Well, here are the basic highlights. He served at the court of the despot of Serbia, where he met and married his wife Elizabeth. He spent 2 years serving in the Duke of Milan's army in Italy. He was then in the entourage of Sigismund as a court knight. He then did border duties in southern Hungary on the estates gifted to him for Sigismund for his services in court. He then spent 2 years serving Sigismund in his conflict with the Hussites. So, in the space of 10 years, Janos had seen the mercenary companies of Italy, the peasant armies of the Hussites with their war wagons, artillery, and defensive anti-cavalry tactics, and then on to the fast-moving cavalry skirmishes and raids of the southern Hungarian borders. 1437, key date, it's the death of Sigismund. At this point, Janos and his brother so impressed Siggy's successor, Albert, with their aggressive counter raids against the Ottomans that they were elevated to true barons of the realm and given further estates. So at the ripe old age of 28, Janos was actually a fairly high-ranking nobleman from a fairly insignificant family. Now, what's slightly ironic about this is, in doing so, Albert improved the power base of a family that within the year would be supporting a rival to Albert's titles after he succumbed to illness and died in 1439. As part of an alliance of nobles, the Hunyadi family refused to recognize Albert's newly born son Ladislau, and instead offered the crown to Ladislau, King of Poland. So, they were keeping it with the Ladislaus. Both Ladislaus were crowned King of Hungary within 1 month of each other, and a civil war began in earnest. Now, Albert's widow Elizabeth, with her baby son Ladislau, retreated towards Austria and the northern Hungarian counties and estates. And at the same time, she made quite a fateful decision. She decided to hand over control of some of the wealthy mining areas in Slovakia to the control of a Czech mercenary called Jan Žižka. Now, Žižka would eventually relinquish control of these areas and integrate his Hussite forces into the Black Army of King Matthias Hunyadi a mere 22 years after taking control of the Slovakian area. He would even become a commander in the Black Army and a Hungarian nobleman, his family still being recorded up until the 17th century. So, as you can see, it was an inadvertently long-term decision that Elizabeth made. So, fairly quickly, the sides panned out. You had the Hunyadis and most of the Hungarian estate nobles on one side, most of the Germanized northern factions on Elizabeth and Ladislau, Albert's young son, on the other. But by 1441, only Žižka was still successfully operating on behalf of the Elizabethan party, for want of a better word. What had happened was Janos Hunyadi and a fellow nobleman that he knew called Nicholas of Lock had managed in that year to crush the rival nobles in the south of Hungary that were still supporting Elizabeth, basically removed any chance that the northern Hungarian forces could make any leeway coming south. This basically cleared the way for the Polish king Ladislaus to secure his grip on the Hungarian throne. Hunyadi was given what was genuinely at the time assumed to be a really difficult task. He was given the task of subduing Transylvania, which was very split in its loyalties, and given the nature of the countryside, was quite difficult to easily control. Janos, however, gathered together a mix of mercenaries and what would later become his primary combat banner of personal bodyguards, and basically took the simple expedient of expelling any nobleman of suspect loyalty, whether they were genuinely or not. He just kicked them out and awarded their estates to his own followers or allies. So within the year, Transylvania was pretty much totally loyal to the Hunyadi family, and would remain so until the next century. He even managed to find time in 1441 to bloody the nose of Ishak Bey, the Ottoman commander of Sarajevo, in a pitched open battle. And this is the first time he's recorded as having fought in a significant battle against Ottoman forces. However, the Ottomans did return the favour on Hunyadi the following year with a surprise invasion of Transylvania. They initially defeated Hunyadi, whose troops, though, were able to manage quite a skillful retreat, taking relatively minor casualties in the process. And this allowed them to turn the tables when reinforcements arrived under Nicholas of Lock. There was a period of consolidation. I won't go into long detail. Sorry, a bit of a pun there. From 1441 to about 1443, Hunyadi and the Polish, I'm calling him the Polish king because it makes it easy to differentiate them, led a series of raids that would become known as the Long Campaign, and they actually fought over the winter of 42 to 43 against the Ottomans. Now, their success rate, to be honest, was about 50-50. They lost a lot of horses, had to abandon their wagons, but they achieved more victories against the Ottomans than anybody had in a very long time. One of the other significant things that came out of this long campaign was one of the Ottoman commanders, Skanderbeg, deserted the Ottoman army and led his native Albanians in revolt, setting up quite a substantial independent area. The other thing that came out of this was the Hungarian campaigns actually generated quite a lot of popular enthusiasm across what we would call Western Europe and Italy. And this led the Pope to push for a crusade. Great in principle, and it was launched in 1444. Unfortunately, it died near Varna on the Black Sea coast. Here, Hunyadi, despite engineering the complete isolation of the Ottoman Sultan and his centre, he managed to strip away both Ottoman cavalry wings, left them in complete disarray, was remustering his forces, and all he got to do was watch as the king led a premature attack right into the Janossi forces guarding the Sultan. The king's head on a halberd saw the Christian army disintegrate, and Hunyadi spent a very uncomfortable few weeks as a guest of Vlad Dracul, father of the slightly more famous Wallachian Vlad Tepes, or Dracula if you prefer. He was, however, eventually released by Dracul unharmed. Now, if Hungarian politics were not complicated enough, the Hungarian nobles, on the death of the Polish king, elected Hunyadi to be regent Albert's son, Ladislaus, as the only remaining legitimate heir, now recognized as Ladislaus V. However, Ladislaus remained firmly in the custody of his guardian, Frederick III of Austria. The Czech Jiskra still controlled most of Slovakia and other parts of Hungary. Much of northern Hungary that wasn't controlled by Žižka remained in the hands of a prominent anti-Hunyadi Szély family under Count Ulrich. Now, basically, 3 years of raids and counter-raids saw no change in this status quo in Hungarian politics. Hunyadi did, however, find time to dispose Vlad Dracul from his throne, basically, I think, in revenge for the very uncomfortable couple of weeks he had after fleeing Varna. He also found time to assist Peter, a pretender to the Moldavian throne, to secure it in return for land and fortifications. Hunyadi also forged an alliance with Skanderbeg for joint operations against the Ottomans. So in 1448, invading with Wallachian allies, Hunyadi was surprised by an Ottoman army before he could link up with Skanderbeg, and was then subsequently defeated in a 3-day battle at Kosovo Pole. Again, forced to flee the battlefield. Once again, he was captured on the way back to Hungary, this time by Branković, the Serbian despot. This time he was released after a ransom was paid, or at least negotiated, and he returned to Hungary. So, back in Hungary, rebuilding his army. So from 1448, Hunyadi alternated between domestic troubles to dealing with external threats, and failing to finish off any of them. He was always distracted by the next coming crisis, never had quite enough time to finish the previous crisis. There still remained independent forces on the northern Hungarian borders. The Ottomans were continually raiding to the south. Again, this went on for quite a few number of years. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 saw renewed Ottoman pressure into Serbia, even though technically Hungary and Ottomans had an alliance that Serbia would remain as a buffer state. Hunyadi and the Hungarian state really had no choice but to intervene in these fights to attempt to reverse the land loss and to secure the fortresses that protected a lot of the crossings and valley passes. In what was to be the final act in his life, Hunyadi led a relief force against the Sultan's siege of Belgrade in 1456, successfully defeating the besiegers and forcing their retreat, but in turn dying from plague that swept through the army camps. On Janos's death, the Hunyadi family was briefly led by their eldest son, another Ladislaus, who had his father's ambition but not his political talent. He managed to engineer the murder of Ulrich Szély, who was by then the king's guardian and senior advisor. Ladislaus then promptly walked into the royal court without an escort and was arrested and executed, and his younger brother Matthias was imprisoned. The rest of that tale probably needs a sequel. So, what did Hunyadi achieve during his lifespan? Well, he fought with the main protagonists are the Hussites under Žižka, medieval German forces of Albert and Frederick, Hungarians, Wallachians, Serbians, Ottomans. He allied with the Albanians, the Moldavians, Polish. His fundamental contributions to the Hungarian 15th century history is he set it up so his son Matthias could become king. Now, this is the first instance of a non-blood relation of the king taking the throne. And with it, he gifted him an exceptionally well-trained mercenary army, which became known as the Black Army. And as I alluded to earlier, it actually incorporated a lot of enemies of the Hunyadi family at one point. And I think that's probably where I'm going to stop, because I think, as I say, I could talk forever on this subject. One thing I didn't mention earlier, he actually it's alleged that in his early days he was a page to one of the senior Italian condottieri, but that's never quite been proved. But there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that it was true. And the other thing that's of interest is Matthias. Well, it's of interest to me. Matthias Hunyadi actually wrote a letter around 1480 something, I think it was, in which he said that the sister of his father had been taken into the harem of the Sultan, who then produced a son that also became Sultan. So he was first cousins to the conqueror of Constantinople. Again, never been proved, but it's an interesting tale on the end, I think. Yeah.
Was that actually something to boast about if he was in Christian sphere?
A very good, very interesting point. I mean, what's really interesting about this is it's very much like Richard's El Cid. You have Eastern Orthodox, you have Catholic, you have Islam. None of the religion, well, besides the rather obvious papal crusades, it was almost always politics. For example, Matthias was known as the defender of Christendom, as was his father. But if you look at Matthias's war record, he almost never fought the Ottomans. And there were significant raids into the Holy Roman Empire territory that had to go through Hungary to get to the raiding points, and they weren't interfered with. So you can kind of think that as a defender of Christendom, I think it was probably fair to say that he wasn't living up to his job description. And he actually got accused by the Holy Roman Emperor of collusion with the Ottomans. But there you go.
There we go. Well,
a whistle stop tour.
I mean, the main conclusion you come to is that living in Hungary at that time was quite a dangerous place to live. Being surrounded by Germany, Poland, Serbia, Moldavia, and with the Ottomans nearby, a lot of turbulent states at the time.
Absolutely, but what's also interesting is that a lot of the nobles in the other countries also held significant estates in Hungary. The despot of Serbia had massive estates that Hunyadi confiscated after he got back from his little accident at Kosovo Pole. So it.
Well, that's Hungary is far from unique. I mean, a lot of Germany was controlled by different noblemen who had estates elsewhere. So even in France and England in the 15th century, well, probably less so in the 15th, more so in the 14th century, a lot of nobles held estates in England and France, and sometimes Scotland.
I suppose because we got to remember that the nation state as we understand it today didn't really exist, did it? So I think especially if you look at the England France example, the nobles across those two countries probably saw themselves having more in common with each other than their supposed countrymen a lot of the time.
Yes, I mean you're starting to see the rise of nation states around this time, but it's still very early days.
Yeah, I think we can definitely say that the Hungary and the Balkans are the traditional mess that part of the world seems to have fallen into many times in history.
And from a military point of view, of course, it's the start of the arrival of gunpowder weapons in making an impact on the battlefield.
Yes, but both the Hunyadis were extremely keen on firearm troops. I mean, Janos hired a lot of Czech mercenaries, as did his son, but his son also integrated them into the Hungarian infantry contingents as part of the requirement for the call up, as it were. And yes,
I've got one question for you, Matt, which I'm not sure I've ever seen an adequate answer. Why was the army called the Black Army?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now,
This could be why I've never seen an adequate answer for that.
the common reason given is that they flew under a black banner, because there's one held in, I can't remember the name of the armory in Hungary, that was one of the original banners flown by the army. But it turns out that banner was actually orange and black and had oxidized over the years. So they don't think that's true. The other option, which seems to make much more sense, is there was a period where a lot of the armor was blackened, deliberately blackened, for no other reason than I think it probably looked impressive when you were marching down the street, so to speak, over the hill and far away. And so that's a possibility. There was a third one. It was a mistranslation of an army commander's name. It was one of the original mercenary commanders, and it was written down wrong, and so it became black rather than, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that was the third option. So it takes your money and it takes your pick, really.
Right.
I'd have thought they'd have just gone with expensive army, quite frankly, which is probably what Matthias called it, because it cost him a lot in taxes to keep it going. But,
again, a theme throughout history, I feel.
Yes, quite.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt, for that. That's I must admit, it's a period. It's an area of the world I don't know that much about. Don't know that much of the history. That was really interesting. Don't know about you, Richard.
Yeah, it's a complicated period, that's for sure. The other story I heard about why it was called the Black Army was because the mercenaries weren't paid at one point, and so sewed a black stripe onto their uniforms as a sign of mourning.
I hadn't heard that one, but yeah, quite possibly. There is an example that Gisler's troops weren't paid for a while, and they got a little grabby, shall we say, with the local populace.
Yeah, I think that was common. I think most mercenaries in history were quite grabby if they didn't get paid.
Yeah.
Indeed. Right. Okay, shall we move on to some army lists then? And as I have come up with a Black Army Hungarian, I think maybe that's a good place to start, following on from Matt's history. I will say I did knock this one up quite quickly. It's an army list I've looked at a couple of times, and it's one of those army lists I find it really difficult to get an army I like, because I've sort of thought of doing it a couple of times, but never have done. So anyway, that's a classic. Get your excuses in first as to why your list's a bit rubbish. Anyway, what I'll skip going through the PDF, as we sometimes do, because it's actually quite a long PDF, and just go through what I have chosen for this. But needless to say, there are many options I haven't taken, and I think it's well worth a look at the army. It's obviously the history is interesting, as Matt's just gone, and as I say, I think it's an army. It's definitely, I'm convinced there's a good army in there. I just haven't come up with it. Anyway, onwards and upwards. In the army list I've chosen, as always, of course, all these will be on the blog when the podcast is published, so you'll be able to see what travesty I have come up with. For commanders, they're all professional generals, 3 competent and a mediocre, possibly a tad under general, especially if you're trying to chase down the pesky Ottomans or Albanians or something who are going to run around a lot. But as ever, points are limited. So there we are. And I ended up with a PBS of 7, a scouting of 3, which is okay, nothing special. Okay, the army, I started off with the Royal Bandarium. This is your best cavalry. Technically, I suppose they are the king's troops, but we've heard, the king probably wasn't leading the army that often. Anyway, these are cavalry formed loose, superior, armoured horse, fully armoured, charging lancer, melee expert. So that's quite a lot of points in there, 1,344 points for that unit. Obviously, quite hard hitting, and the armoured horse means it's nicely protected against shooting, other than, of course, handguns or artillery. A unit of nobles, which is made up of nobles and lesser nobles in 50-50. Formed loose, superior, charging lancer, melee expert. The nobles are fully armoured, the lesser nobles are protected. But they are all superior. 2 units of the Zeklers, cavalry are formed flexible, average protected, experienced bow, short spear. So you've got flexible shooty cavalry, but they're protected, which is always nice. Means they can stand up to other shooters reasonably well without the problems that quite a lot of those flexible shooty cavalry have of being unprotected. An 8 base unit of armati, drilled close, average protected infantry, polearm with integral shooters. Another infantry unit, Klipiati, again 8 bases, drilled close infantry, average protected, short spear, shield wall, integral shooters. A unit of archers, these are junk archers, just there as the almost inevitable filler, tribal loose, poor unprotected, unskilled bow, combat shy. Don't expect them to do a lot. 2 units of war wagons, each of just 2 bases. The formed loose battle wagons, average protected, experienced crossbow for 1 base, experienced light artillery for the other, and they've got polearm, and that's it, 2 units of those. And I've got 4 units of skirmishers, 6 bases of handgunners, average protected, experienced firearm, combat shy, and 3 units of archers, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. All of these are 6s. 2 of them are average. 1 is poor. Again, needed to save some points somewhere. So there you are. I do worry that it might be a bit of one thing, a bit of the other, and not quite anything. But that's what I came up with. So Matt, Richard, does it ring your bell, or is it a case of I'd like to face that because I think I can beat it?
I must admit I'm with you. I've never found a Black Army Hungarian that I'd fancy using. I'm not sure I'd fancy using this too much.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to take it on, I think, would be my conclusion. The war wagons, my experience of fighting small numbers of war wagons is that they're easily dealt with. Unlike when you get the massed war wagons of the Hussites, I think small numbers of war wagons are particularly tricky to take advantage of.
The list would allow basically twice as many war wagons as I've got there. You can have up to 8. Not sure that counts as massed though.
No, war wagons are a tricky thing to use. You've tried using them, Matt, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I've tried them in my post. In the way Nick's got them in the small groups for the artillery, then they're just long-range gunners basically to slow people down and be generally irritating, which I quite like as a function. But yes, you're right. If you're going to try and do anything offensive with them, I think you need 8 to 12, and make them the focal point of the army. But they're cheap. Sorry, go on, Nick.
I was going to say, yeah, to some degree, I'd see them as sort of mobile shooty terrain pieces, to be honest, in a way. Occupy some space somewhere. Maybe your opponent will overreact to them. I think people sometimes overreact to the artillery part. They stay away because of the 8 base range for the light artillery. But you're only being shot at by 1 white dice, probably. It's not that exciting.
And people can avoid them because they think, oh, if I charge them, I've got to take a cab test for charging artillery. And that does tend to worry people possibly more than it should. But,
yeah. I mean, on reflection, and I do wonder, are the war wagons in this army a bit of a mistake, actually? Is it one of those tricks the list plays on you? You think, oh, I've got to have them. They were there historically. Janos used them. Ooh. So you end up taking them, and there might be a better list without them.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, no, nor do I. I mean, I think the Amati and the Clipati give you enough infantry to probably protect the war wagons if you wanted to protect them. But yeah, in terms of using that list, it's a better list than I've ever managed to come up with for the Black Army, quite frankly. I'm not sure if that's damning with faint praise or not, or just, if Matt can't come up with a stupid list for it, then, well, you're doomed. But I like, it's got a really nice cavalry punch, which that Royal Banderum is particularly lethal, but of course it's getting it in the right spot. Yeah.
And then protecting its flanks.
Yeah.
The challenge.
Yes, it's obviously got the other nobles unit there, and to some degree the Zeklers may be able to.
Yeah, being protected with the short spear, they'll survive for a while, won't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
It depends what sort of threatening to get round the flank. Yeah, I mean, it's always a problem when you've got an army with sort of just one killer unit. Although the other nobles unit, they are superior charging lance and melee experts. They're not that bad.
Yeah, I would say you've got 2 strike units in the cavalry, but yeah, it's still a challenge. Well, maybe it's a struggle I find with that sort of army, but I find that I end up committing the punch and then find I've done it in the wrong place or at the wrong time.
Yeah. It has to be said, it's not that big an army. It's 9 tugs. 2 of those tugs are the war wagon ones, which are only 2 bases each.
Yeah, I mean, you've gone for 4 units of skirmishers.
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a theme recently, hasn't it, to go with skirmishers?
Well, do you really need that many, given you've got the long range shooting as well? I don't know.
No, possibly not. I think it's maybe I couldn't say. It was knocked up fairly quickly. Excuse. But yeah, I'm sure there's more thinking could go into it. I do. Maybe it explains why it had about a 50-50 record that Matt was talking about in the history.
Oh, fortunately, that would have been. Actually, I don't know what the dates run for the Black Army. Yes, it's 42. Yes, you're quite right. Yes, it would technically be the Black Army. Although I think there's an argument that actually the 1440 up to 1444, you probably should use the medieval Hungarian list, the earlier one.
Right. Yeah.
With a few irregular troops thrown in on top, but yeah.
Oh, the Meg list runs from 1442. Maybe there's a slight tweak in there you could suggest to Richard for next year's lists.
I have a list that I'm writing of possible tweaks to be done to most of the Eastern European and Central European stuff.
I look forward to receiving it.
Yeah. All players out there who are worried about this, please direct your hate mail to Matt Hayward. But for once, this is an area I know so little about. I will not be contributing to the lists, so it won't be my fault for once.
To be fair, most of them are minor things. Like I don't necessarily think that the handgunners should be compulsory in allies. If you take the Black Army as an ally, I don't necessarily think the handgunners are logistically internal for an ally command, that kind of thing. But minor things. Yeah, things that keep me awake late at night and need to be vented about.
Wake up screaming in the middle of the night, do you? Because there's
that's right.
All 3 bases of handgunners in the Black Army list.
Yes, absolutely. It stops me taking an extra unit of war wagons or something, I suspect, but it's all. But no.
Okay, so I think fair to say that this army has had list anyway, had a bit of an underwhelming reaction. In which case, I'll move swiftly on to let Richard's army, and let's see what we can make of this.
So I've gone for an Albanian Principalities army, which is a bit of an oddball army because there's a lot of flexible, skilled javelin in this army. So anyway, I've gone with a talented, instinctive army commander and 3 competent subs. Gives me a PBS of 7 and a scouting of 6. So no shortage on the scouting front. And the reason for the high scouting is because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units of form flexible, average, unprotected, skilled javelin, short spear, melee expert cavalry. So they're quite the core of the army, really. I have supported those with 2 units of 4 veteran cavalry, who are form flexible, superior, protected, experienced javelin, short spear, melee expert, and shoot and charge. So they're typically they're intended to be used close, whereas the unprotected flexibles I would generally deploy in the skirmish order to when I say close, I mean loose, but you know what I meant. Yeah, whereas the unprotected ones are in skirmish order, with the idea of perhaps 2 of the skirmishers with 1 of the veteran cavalry there, just to ensure it doesn't get pushed back and bullied too badly. But all with the intention of trying to avoid fighting until you have to. Along with that, I have a unit of mercenary men-at-arms who are cavalry drilled loose, average, fully armoured men, unarmoured horses, charging lancer, and dismountable. The dismountable is quite a valid option here, because you then got a unit of form loose, average, 2-handed cut and crush, admittedly only a 4, but by dismounting you avoid the impetuosity you get with the charging lancer. So you've got the option there. Along with that, I've got 2 units of 8 tribal loose, average, protected, unskilled javelin, short spear. They're to contest terrain, which if you're in a themed period around this period is an option you may need to engage with, or else they can sort of hold that strategic steep hill or mountain, make it difficult to push them off there. And backed up, unusually for me, I went with a couple of units of hide at the back generally. 1 unit of 10 levy, the tribal loose, poor, unprotected, combat shy, at 11 points each. So a unit of 10 is 110. The only reason I went for 10 was because it happened to make the army up to 10,000 points exactly.
Oh.
So business. And then a unit of 6 archers who are tribal loose, poor, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. Along with that, I get 2 units of 6 skirmishing archers to finish it off. So they're there to snipe around, support the skirmishing cavalry or whatever nuisance they can get up to. So that's the army. Definitely a Richard sort of mad skirmishing with javelins type cavalry army, where you really don't want to be throwing those 1s or 2s when you evade, and you have to hope you get in some early powerful shots to weaken your opponent. But I think it's quite a reasonable option. I'd imagine it will give quite a few headaches to people facing it. Any thoughts, gentlemen?
It's my kind of army, so you're not going to get any complaints from me on that front. it's one I've looked at a lot that I've wanted to try. That skilled javelin is just too nice to walk away from, frankly, and it's pretty much the kind of build I'd put on it as well. I might have gone down to 11 maybe but I'm not sure what I'd spend the points on. Possibly a second talented instinctive general, just to give me a bit more.
Yeah,
Two
but
commands with 4.
266 points for 2 units increases your break point, which is quite handy when you're trying to evade with skilled javelin shooters, because inevitably at some point it's going to go wrong and you're going to get caught in the backside.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, the skilled shooters, they're great. That one base width difference in range to bow can be quite a biggie. I have to say, I think I think it's got a lot going for it, Richard. One thing, I would really want those veteran cavalry in 6s.
Yeah.
You knew that was coming. I could see the expression on your face there.
I knew exactly that was coming.
Yeah, I'd almost go as far as to say I'd drop the javelin man. Drop those 2 tribal loose, which gives you the points and a few more actually you could probably play around with, but it's
an option, but the armies, the veteran cavalry aren't there to fight until right near the end, frankly. So that's my theory. But yeah, it's a go with the 6s is a perfectly valid, reasonable option. Just hope the terrain works out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's got some similarities with the Hun I used at Preston.
Yep.
And that had the sort of 2 Hun noble units, which would be quite similar to that. Obviously bow instead of javelin, but superior protected, experienced shooter, short spear, melee expert, shoot and charge. Found them in 6s, were really, really good. So I'd be very tempted to drop the javelin man, get those veteran cavalry up to 6s, and you'd have some points left over, possibly to add shoot and charge to the cavalry. I'm assuming that they can have it, but I just found it quite useful to have some of the Huns with it. But it's not the end of the world if you don't. I think the important ones to have it are the nobles, the veterans in this case.
Yeah, the cav can have it, and it's only 6 points each as well.
So you might be able to get a couple of units up to shoot and charge as well. Mind you, there's always that if you don't have everybody with shoot and charge, you can guarantee that the ones with it won't be anywhere near where anything you want to charge.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Again, that was exactly the Huns I had. Everybody at shoot and charge.
I think with the what was it? Oh no, it was when I was using the Typha Andalusian. I had 6 units of javelin cavalry and 1 horse archer cavalry, and of course the one time I needed to shoot at range of 3 was the horse archer was never anywhere near.
Of course,
where it needed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely guaranteed. Yeah, I think you said about terrain. I think with this, if there's terrain the cavalry can't operate in, I think you just live with it. To be honest, the flexible cavalry can go through it fairly well. If it's only rough going, they're not even disadvantaged, are they?
Yeah, it's the rough terrain is only a problem if you're trying to evade back into it, in my experience.
Yeah,
that's where your biggest risk is. That's why if I'm playing against shooty cavalry armies, I tend to want to try and deploy rough terrain into their deployment area.
Oh yeah,
so I can push them back. I can push them back into the terrain with a chance of catching them.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Just to come back to the terrain the Albanians can have. Shame they can't have plains. Although coastal can be fairly open.
Yeah, I don't think that's a huge disadvantage. But,
no.
Yeah, not too much flat ground in Albania. little bit near the coast, but that's it. So
Yeah.
not really justified for planes, I'm
Oh,
afraid.
no, I wouldn't be suggesting it, but no, I think you. So if you defended, presumably you'd usually go coastal.
I guess so, yes.
So that's obviously can depend on the opposing army. So did you say you've used this one, Matt, or just your sort of army?
It's my sort of army. I fought against it. I think Dave Parrish ran it one year at Roll Call. I think it may have been the first year that I played Meg, in fact, and it was one of those that stuck in my mind. And,
Right.
So yeah, it's on my long list of to-dos. I'll eventually have all the Central and Eastern European armies at the rate I'm going. Eventually.
Yeah. Is it who would do figures for this one? Is this?
Essex do some which are not bad, but they're limited in number and form.
Yeah.
But to be honest, you could pretty much get away with any of the Akinji figures because a lot of them are deserted out of the Ottoman army. So
Oh,
it was a big mix. Serbian figures as well would do the same job. There's no where you see a uniform nature to the Albanians tended to be when they moved over into Italy as mercenaries, when they fled out there.
is that the Stradios?
The Stradios, and that's where a lot of the representation comes from. It's from Italian art, not from Albanian art. So within their own country, it's much more a broader mix. So yeah, I'd be quite comfortable if you just mixed them all up from the same area. And no, well, I would hope nobody would say you've got that wrong, because I don't think you could prove it one way or the other. But
So would that be a case of the javelin classification here is a bit of a averaging out of a whole load of weapons? If you say some Akinji types, some bowmen in there, mind you, I suppose some of the Akinji types could be javelin men as well.
Yeah, and again, I think the javelin is very much from their Italian experiences. It was, I guess, given the train, it was probably a much more sensible option than the bow, because you didn't need the range and you were working in closer confines. But yeah, I think you could quite comfortably mix it all up, a bit like the Lithuanians, where they have bows and spears.
Yeah.
Depending on what period you're in, depends on whether they're classed as a horse archer or they're a spearman that didn't use his bow till he got off his horse.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering with some of these troop types that to some degree the weapons are sort of averaging out, aren't they? They're and to get the right effect.
But they were certainly the closed type, as in they would close on the enemy much more willingly than the Akinji or something along those lines. So I think the Meg classification gives you that feel.
That was the main rationale for if they were classified as with bow, they'd be more likely to stay away, whereas the javelin classification means they're more likely to get up close and personal, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it works well, particularly with melee expert as the combination.
Yeah, because
really emphasises that.
Yeah, they stand up better in the fight than if they were bow but no melee expert. So yeah, excellent. So actually, well, that one seemed to get a better reception than mine did. Not that I'm taking it personally, Richard. So anyway,
I'll do mine, and then I can slip to the bottom of the pile, and then you can go up a notch.
I wouldn't say that. Okay, Matt, what have you got for us?
I've gone with Serbian Empire. Again, I'm not going to go through the list, because pretty much I think I've probably taken just about every troop type you're allowed anyway. But before I start, one thing I will say about the Serbian Empire of this period, if you do it as George Brankovic, who was the despot, he died at the age of 90 in the same year as Hunyadi. So, in terms of long life, he did a pretty good job, considering he spent most of his life fighting all his neighbors and then allying with some of them and fighting others. But anyway, so what have I gone with? I've gone with 3 competent, instinctive generals, Serbian generals. So they're all subs or the army commander. But I've taken an Ottoman ally. I'm not sure it works, but I thought I'd give it a whirl. Who's competent professional? That gives you a PBS of 6, scouting of 4. Your terrain types are standard and mountain, unfortified camp. The list has to have a minimum of 12 archers. Now, I've taken them as the upgraded version with shields, so they're tribal loose, average protected, experienced bow, 2 blocks of 8. And then there's, I meant to look up how this is pronounced. I think it's pronounced Valastella, but don't quote me on that. My Serbian is worse than my Polish.
My Serbian is non-existent, so I'm in no position to criticise.
I was going to say my Serbian and Polish are equally non-existent.
Yeah, I didn't quantify how bad it was, but yeah. So the list allows you to combine essentially what in Western armies would be sergeants with a front rank of knights. So what you've got is the best troops, which are cavalry formed loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, dev charger, melee expert, basically the full fat version of a Western knight. Your second rank is formed loose, average protected, charging lancer, dev charger, melee expert. So unlike a lot of the Western lists, the second rank is actually exactly the same equipment, just lighter armor. So what I've ended up with is I've taken 2 blocks of 6 of these. So you've got front rank superior, back rank average, with a really nice frontal crust. The list also has a compulsory set of 4 in Western panoply. So they are cavalry formed loose, average, fully armored, charging loose, charging lancers, devastating charger, melee expert. Now they could have a second rank of lesser troops, but what I've decided to do here is I've taken a full block of 6, so they're entirely fully armored but average. So you don't suffer that a really annoying, you charge into a bowman and promptly get 2 whites in your face, and you've lost a fully armored before you've even started. These will obviously, probably never ever make contact now that I've made it a block of 6. They're just going to stand there and chase people around the table. But
go and look at our lovely Western armor.
Yes, isn't it shiny? Exactly. But and then you get to the Ottoman ally, who is I've taken 8 skilled bow janissaries who are drilled loose, superior protected, skilled bow. The compulsory Sfahi, who are cavalry formed loose, average protected, experienced bow, short spear, block of 6. A couple of more Serbian units to finish off, getting into 9 tugs, which is the Valachians, which are cavalry formed, flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow. They're also called Tartars in the list, so you can pick your name, but they do the same job. Block of 6 of those. And then the Hussars, or the Guzars, depending on how you want to pronounce it, who are cavalry formed, flexible, average protected, charging lancer. Block of 6.
Love them.
Yes, yeah, I'm quite partial to them. And then there's a couple of skirmishing units to round out the Ottoman contingent, which are the Akinji, which are cavalry skirmishers, average, unprotected, experienced bow. Cantabrian. Did I get that right?
You finally got it right, mate.
Yes, that's it. I'm giving up now. I'm not talking anymore. Right. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Right, combat shy, block of 6. Azab archers. Now this is quite bizarre. This one. Azab archers, which is a regrade from what they normally are on the list, which is loose archers. These become infantry skirmishers, poor, unprotected, unskilled bow, barricades, combat shy. The normal list, they're average, unprotected, experienced bow, barricades, combat shy. But I've just really downgraded. Basically, they are a cheap block of 9 barricades. So
that is just so mad.
I know. I can have 36 of them, I think, in the list, but I resisted temptation if I ever did an Ottoman army. I've got to stop myself doing that. But
so you'd start your deployment by putting 36 bases, one deep, across the front of the table.
Yeah.
Because the skirmishers that can go in the flank sector.
They can indeed, yes.
Oh, no.
It is very me, and I'm desperately trying not to make an Ottoman army just so I can do that. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I'm now desperately looking in the rule book to see if there's anything to say barricades can't go in the flank sector.
There isn't. I've looked.
Oh.
You might want to clarify it and say they can't, and I will.
No, that's just so funny. We have to leave it.
That seems perfectly fine to me.
Yeah, no, I could live with it.
I think it's genius, personally.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant.
I saw that, and yeah. I will fess up, for God's wills it, which we will discuss later. I am actually running an Ottoman Turk army. So be warned, if anybody's listening to this before the event, there's the possibility there may be barricades of some, many, or lots. Anyway,
36.
there you go. There's a Serbian Empire list for you.
Okay. But it's dominated by that last entry, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Okay. Richard, over to you to provide something sensible while I just giggle in the corner.
Yeah. I'm just thinking through. It's nothing wrong with the army. I'm not sure I would know how to use it, is my honest opinion.
I can tell you what my thoughts are when I put it together.
Yeah, go on.
Run the barricades, assuming you don't end up with coastal, or even if you did end up with coastal, you run the barricades, put the archers from the barricade out to 2/3 of the way into the table, and then you run your heavy cavalry on the outside flank with your skirmishing cavalry on the outside of that, and basically you pivot on the barricade, depending on who you're fighting. I'm not saying that works for everybody, but so you for them to get to the archers, they're running the risk of getting a very big hammer of superior knights into their flank, which they've got to stop. So that was kind of where my thinking went with that. Of course, your other option is you put the barricades out with the light infantry, you step the light infantry back, and then you walk 2 lots of tribal and your skilled janissaries up to it, but nobody's ever going to go near those, so it's just a waste of troops.
Well, that's always my problem with barricades, is anybody with any nous will probably just ignore them and figure out what to go. So my concern with barricades is always that they end up, you're in danger of ending up with a low scoring game, which in competition is not going to do you much favours. But
there's only the one unit with
it's not. I mean, in this case, I mean the points difference is so minimal. It's not a huge problem, and it does give you that sort of security if you needed it. But yeah, it's using the rest effectively together, the knights and the janissaries and the archers and so on. As I say, what have you got? You've got 1 flexible lancers, 3 units of other lance cavalry. So there's a good punch there, certainly, supported by the bow and the 1 unit of experienced bow cavalry. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd like to fight it either, to be honest.
My job is done. It's don't know how to use it, but nobody wants to fight it either.
Yeah, I think I'm round about the same situation as Richard. Actually, I can't quite see how to use it, but equally, yeah, it's quite tough. Obviously, the janissaries can really cause problems to people. In conjunction with those serve la stella.
Matt, it reminds me of your Korean army. I think it's more effective than your Korean army, where you had the skilled bow foot. You had, in that case, you had infantry with artillery. They weren't barricades, but it has the same sort of flavour. I'm getting the feeling.
Probably, it's probably where my mind went when I was looking at the list. It's something, as I've played around with that style army quite a bit this year. It's probably where I went. Yeah, so the Korean list is actually allowed barricades for all its infantry, but they're just a little more expensive.
Yeah, I have to say, I was pleased you included the Gazars, whatever. I just love them. Form flexible, average protected charging lancer. Yeah, they've just got so much potential of being inserted. You know, use use the skirmisher movement speed to get them somewhere, and if somebody takes their eye off the ball, they're on the flank, flipped into tug formation, and then the charging lancer, potentially into a flank. You know, that alone could win you a game. I mean, I've had a bit of success with in my Muslim type armies with the Bedouin form flexible, unprotected long spear, being effective, and indeed recently had it done to me by Lee Sanders, who had a unit of those. It broke 2 or maybe 3 units of mine, and that was only a 4 base unit. So that was quite painful. But I think, you know, they're potentially really devastating.
And they also have that really nice little quirk where if I start them as a sug in skirmish formation, I can tug them with a single unit, or it just gives you that extra flexibility where you don't have to group move a unit of knights and a second unit of lancers. You can just yank it up if you need to. So yeah, and as you say, that green card to do a double move and end that double move by flipping back into a tug. It's just
oh yeah, I mean it's the old, you know, I know it's what Ray calls a 10 base width charge. Yeah. If you can do that at the end of your move, the end of the move, the opponent's got the initiative. Sorry, is the active player. Sorry, so you're the active player next turn. That really can be horrible for them. And as I said, charging lancers doing it, lovely.
And it makes a lovely reserve. Put it in the table in the sug formation, and you can send it wherever it needs to go very quickly.
Yeah, and again, protected. You know, if it needs to just charge into something to delay something, you know, it's got 2 claims in the charge. It's not unprotected, so it hopefully won't be gunned down if it has to go near something that shoots. 6 bases. You know, it's not a rubbish unit by any stretch, even in frontal.
Yeah.
You know, I think it could act quite nicely with the Wallachians.
Oh yes, yeah.
No, it's yeah. So yeah, it's yeah. No, I'll go with Richard's thinking here. Not sure how to use it. Don't want to face it. So
I'll take that for a win, I think.
Yeah. So all good, right? Okay, we've got one more army list, which is another one from myself. This is the one I started out by choosing before we decided we really ought to have a Black Army list in a podcast that covered Janos Hunyadi. But for this one, I've gone outside of the House of Osman list and gone for a medieval German and imperial one, because Matt mentioned that Janos fought with the Germans at some point.
He fought with Sigismund, and he fought against Albert and Frederick.
That was it. There was a connection, so it was a legitimate army.
Yeah, I'm not sure with a Frisian ally it's a legitimate.
Shush! You're giving something away. Yeah, sorry, I just couldn't resist. Now, okay, Richard has given away that I've gone for the medieval German with the Frisian ally. That would be a long way for the Frisians to walk. But it was partly on the basis that I think I can actually field this. Sort of. So I was partly thinking, well, I might be able to use this at some point, should I ever want to, for some bizarre reason. Anyway, the list is from the Holy Roman Empire PDF. As I said, all the other ones we've looked at tonight have been from House of Osman. In the imperial version of medieval German, the medieval German is just one list, of course, but it's got the odd thing in there that is only allowed to certain subsets, in this case, the imperial. I've gone for a competent, instinctive army commander and 2 competent instinctive subgenerals. Aforementioned Frisian ally, I've gone for talented instinctive. Talented because I definitely want them to play. Don't think there's enough. So poor unfortified camp. With the troops I've taken, I end up with a PBS of 5 and scouting for 2. So again, it's, it's not great. You're going to have to come up with a plan for being out scouted by things like the Albanians and indeed the Serbians, who are most likely to outscout you, but definitely the Albanians. So, I think these armies where you're likely to be outscouted, always think ahead, have a plan. What's your sort of good, solid deployment that's not going to get you into trouble? I end up with 11 tugs, so I have a break of 6. So we'll start with the Frisian ally, since it's been mentioned. This is just 3 units, all are infantry, all are 9 bases. 6 bases of tribal loose, average protected, long spear, devastating charger, combat shy, and 3 units of the same but unprotected. The Frisian spearmen at this stage have to be downgraded 1/3 to 1/2, if I remember rightly. So basically I've gone with the 3rd option. So basically you'll form them up 2 ranks of the protected and a back rank of the unprotected. Working on the basis by the time the unprotected are fighting, the unit's probably mostly gone anyway. Obviously the combat classification is strange but interesting. Long spear, dev charger, combat shy. So 3 units of those, all of 9 bases. The German part start off with a 6 base unit of best knights, formed loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, devastating charger. A unit of knights which are the same but average, but also come with dismountable, and they dismount as formed close, fully armored foot, 2-handed cut and crush. Optional out for the Imperials is a 4 base unit of Teutonic knights, formed loose, superior, fully armored, charging lancer, devastating charger, melee expert. And to be honest, I think that's the reason I've gone for Imperial. So I wanted the Teutonic knights, and why wouldn't you? And we move on to some infantry. An 8 base unit of militia spearmen, formed close, average protected, short spear, shield wall. Militia crossbowmen, 6 bases, formed loose, average protected, experienced crossbow, combat shy. Some mercenary spearmen, drilled close, average protected, long spear, 8 bases. Mercenary crossbowmen, 6 bases of drilled loose, average protected, experienced crossbow, combat shy. And last tug, 6 bases of mounted crossbowmen, formed loose, average protected, these are cavalry, experienced crossbow. 2 units of skirmishing archers, infantry skirmisher, average unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. Now, this one quite deliberately, I do think this army can benefit from having a couple of units of skirmishers, just to forestall Richard saying, why have you taken skirmishers in this army? I hope he approves of that, but I think in the army, this one, a couple of units of skirmishers is quite useful. So you'd have got I think you probably want to have a good chunk of terrain on the table for those Frisians to operate in, tribal loose. That said, if they're in the open, the long spear means that charging cavalry against them would have things like the charging lancer cancelled. They wouldn't get the claims for that. So whilst they're probably not great in the open, they're not completely dog meat, and they can probably hold quite a lot of ground up. So anyway, there we are, Imperial German. Probably not one that Janos would have fought with because of the Frisians, but there we are. Comments, chaps?
Yeah, solid would be my reaction. It's a German army I've seen in similar fashion. The Frisians obviously give you the loose combat capability, although I have found that they don't survive tremendously well.
I'd be happy to fight to the last Frisian.
Once you get through those protected ones, you tend to find the unprotected ones sort of start to die off quite quickly, in my experience. But yes, and then you are dying quickly.
They will do. I mean, unprotected combat shy is not great.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a solid. You got your solid chunk of knights. You've got your spear and crossbowmen, which is what the Germans tend to have. So yeah, not appropriate for the south and east of Germany, but there you go.
So not appropriate to the history we were talking of.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, it's in fact the Germans. There's only, I think, a handful of examples, if that, of Germans actually allying with Frisians. But the problem is they did, and trying to restrict it to armies that only actually campaigned around Holland would be a bit of a challenging for a list. Whereas their usefulness in terms of a competition means they tend to be chosen disproportionately. But never found any way of doing that. What you've actually set me thinking is whether any Imperial army ever allied with the Frisian, and that I'm not so sure about. But
that'd be a fair point. I think it'd only lose the Teutonic Knights.
Yeah, that would be the only difference.
And probably replace it with, say, another unit of the ordinary knights.
Yeah.
Which, again, whilst not as effective in sheer punch, would be a couple of bases bigger. So could be a bit of swings and roundabouts on that one. I think it's just worth pointing out these German lists. The knights in the German list, very few of them are knights and sergeants, are they? They tend to be all knights, which is different from most of the rest of Western Europe, at least.
Yeah, that's supposed to represent the fact that you tend to get a lot more ministrales, are they called? Something like that.
Oh yeah, I know the guys you mean. Yeah.
So it was a way of differentiating the fact that German armies, it's a bit artificial, but the whole feudal construct of the German armies was slightly different from other parts of Europe.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Equally, they don't tend to have melee expert.
Yeah.
So it makes them different, which is nice.
Indeed. Or it may not be just justified historically, but it makes them different.
Our lists are wonderful. Meg lists are great, remember. Matt, your thoughts?
Pretty much on the same line. Sorry, just the mercenary spearmen with long spear. They're slightly unusual, aren't they? Aren't they usually short spear shield wall types? I mean, for the Germans to go into long spear.
Again, that's to represent that they were actually probably more effective.
Okay.
Capable of standing up to cavalry than the militia spearmen.
Makes sense.
I suppose they could also be Low Countries types.
Yes, that's true. Is it Flanders? Were they traditionally the ones who were?
Yeah, they tended to. So the Low Countries tended to be where you had the longer spearmen, but it's more. It's more to represent they're more capable, they're general better capable troops.
You're only allowed one unit, so it goes on the army list really early on.
No, it's as Richard said, it's a really solid list, and I mean, the Frisians are almost a no-brainer for that list. I have to say, though, it does kind of feel that they add the bulk and they're actually pretty damn effective at what they do. They're very hard to kill quickly. But
yeah, I think if they can end up fighting in rough going as well, they're probably at least as good, possibly a bit better than a lot of other loose type troops, and you get a lot of them cheap. You're only talking what, 450, under 500 points for 9 bases.
Cool. Yeah, that is cheap. I'm paying 350 points for 9 barricades.
Propped up by some Azad.
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure who's propping who up, to be honest, given they're poor and unskilled.
It's not appropriate to this topic, but I've just pulled together a Kingdom of the Isles list for a thing next weekend, and managed to have I think it was 11 tugs of 9 bases.
It takes a while to hack your way through them. All you need is a round where you don't roll a lot, and you're looking. There's still thousands of them.
Yeah. Well, I managed to do that with the Bantu tribes at Foot Sloggers.
Yes, we'll come on to that shortly. Yeah, so I'm getting the impression that solid is the word that's being used. I'm not setting the world alight with this list, but it's not a daft one.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's got the Frisians, which I play it just for those, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm never a huge fan of making the crossbowmen combat shy. I like my crossbowmen able to fight, because what with the S causing wounds on the impact and so on, I actually find they're better that way. But that's a personal preference thing, and obviously combat shy, they're substantially cheaper. So
it makes quite a lot of
points. You take your choice.
You do. No, I agree with that. I quite like your average protected, experienced crossbowman, not combat shy. Didn't quite work with this list.
Yeah.
So you just have to be a little bit more careful with them. But yeah, it's you could say lose one of the skirmishes and you'd get at least one of those units up to not combat shy. Perhaps could choose either of them. Pays your money, takes your choice on that. The drilled ones have the advantage; they're more manoeuvrable, so you might be able to extract them if they get into trouble. So make the militia ones not combat shy. I think it's a very valid point, that one. So it's that plus when people charge you is really, really useful and can really make a massive difference. Because you're going from, if you're on white dice, you're going from 2 wounds to 3 wounds on the dice.
Yeah.
So that's a big jump. Get a lucky dice roll. Well, hey, you can really ruin somebody's day. Anyway, we've probably got through enough of that. The last thing on these lists, I was wondering how we would rank them in terms of which one we would choose to do. I think my impression is the Black Army list I came up with sits at the bottom of the list for all of us.
Yes.
The one we were least desiring to use. Out of the other 3, I'm rather suspecting either Richards or Matt's are going to be the top choice.
Well, I'd go with the Albanian. I think that has the most flexibility, literally.
Yeah. Ho, 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 ho.
I'm here all week. Yeah. For terms of a competition army, I'd definitely go with that one, I think.
Okay. It would be my preference as well.
I think I would probably go with that as well. I think I'd put Matt's as second, and just for I want to work out how to use it. I think the German one I've come up with, it's solid and obvious. Almost the challenge of Matt's list would make it my second choice. although I suspect the German might just be, well, it'd be probably easier to use and might just end up being more effective.
I suspect I'd pick the German just because I know how I use Matt's list.
We could make those a tie.
Yeah, I'd run the Serbian to see if it would work, and I like top heavy knights, quite frankly. Combine that with Janissaries and yeah.
Okie dokie. Right. I think we've done those to death now. So this competitions have been mentioned. Richard just mentioned he used Bantu Kingdoms at Foot Sloggers a few weeks ago. Obviously, we finished the last podcast by talking briefly about Foot Sloggers. So I don't know, perhaps just some thoughts on how it went? Obviously, Matt, sorry, you of course you weren't there, unfortunately, but
yes, I couldn't get leave from work for that one.
yeah, no doubt you've seen the list that went in, but I suppose, Richard, how do you think it went? Because I think ultimately it was your suggestion.
Yeah, as I ended up organising it, and the theme was my original suggestion. Yeah, I was very pleased. I thought we had a cracking range of armies, everything from Canary, Inca, Hawaiian, and Mapuche in South America, through to a couple of late Swiss, Free Company, 100 Years' War English medieval armies, through to Iko-Iki. We had Chin in the Far East. We had Thracian, Roman, Paeonian.
Yeah, Richard Basilowski took Paeonian.
And early Frank, I think, in the Western Europe, and Anglo-Danish, and was it Viking? Something like that. So it was a good range of armies.
And I noticed you missed mine out.
Oh yes, an Arab conquest.
Thank you.
I thought you might mention that one.
Early Arab conquest in this case.
Early Arab conquest. Yes, which chomped through my Bantu tribes that I bought as a spare.
Not without some hairy moments along the way, it must be said, Richard. I think I think all the games I had could have gone either way. I mean, there's lots of infantry hacking at each other.
Yes, indeed. So, but yeah, it proved to have a wider variety of tactical challenges than perhaps some people had expected. So, and I think everybody enjoyed it. So, hopefully, as a theme, it might be run again at some point in the future.
Yeah, no, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was good fun. It was, as you say, it was different. I still have this vague thought that maybe those sort of competitions could be run as 1 day, 3 game, maybe at about 8K points.
Possibly, yes.
Or that just as an option. I don't know. I'm not suggesting it's a better way of doing it, but it's another way of doing it.
Yeah, indeed.
So it just because they are a bit different, and some people might be a bit put off. But then again, we've got lots of competitions in the calendar, so yeah. I don't know if you had any thoughts about the army choices that were made, Matt. I don't know how much attention you paid to it.
I paid quite. I have to say that was my one disappointment of the competition, was there was not enough online photos as it was going through. The draws didn't go up as often, so you weren't quite. I would have followed it quite religiously. It's one of it because the lists when they were published were really interesting. And I have to say I did not expect Simon to win with the one he took. This is Iko-Iki or whatever it was.
Iko-Iki, yeah.
Iko-Iki, yeah. I mean, I expected him to do well because it's Simon, but yeah, to actually to win it with what frankly is suboptimal, should we say?
I'm not sure any of the armies would be considered entirely optimal in normal circumstances.
Yeah, it's very true.
But yeah, I think we can't pass up talking about foot sloggers without asking Richard what it was like to play 2 games of Meg simultaneously, because we were uneven on the first day. So that for those who don't know, for the first game, Richard played 2 games. His Bantu kingdoms faced off against my early Arab conquest, and is it your Inca?
My Inca against Will's Canary.
Yes. So playing 2 tables side by side. Anyway, over to you, Richard. Tell us what it was like, because I just think you were insane.
Yeah, I don't plan to do that again. Let's put it like that. It was a bit brain numbing. The Bantu tribes is actually easy to deploy and play, because quite frankly, you line it up and you go charge ahead. And it's only when your opponent does sneaky things like keeps one of their flanks back that you actually have to start thinking about things, which is most rotten of him.
My army wasn't as wide as yours. I had to.
Yeah. The canary just gave me all sorts of problems, but from a tactical point of view. But yeah, no, it was. I mean, I having odd numbers and buys is so horrible in a competition.
Yeah.
That I thought it would be the better option. It was noticeable that my results improved on the following day when I wasn't playing two armies at once. So, but he enjoyed it. I think I gave my opponents reasonable games.
As I said, I would not have been surprised to have lost the game against the Bantu Kingdoms. At one point, I thought I was well on the way, and then I think I just had one round where I rolled a lot of good combat dice, which sort of got me back in it. So, but I mean, it has to be for the listener. At one point, Richard was basically fighting on something close to 8-foot frontage between myself and Will. So, you know, so
it was almost a case of sort of 40 files worth of fighting in one, of sort of going from left to right, first on one battle and then on the second battle.
Yeah. So
did any shatters and shove carry across to the other table, or did you actually count those?
I think there was a small gap, so we didn't have that conversation. But you know, obviously, Will and I could have a bit of downtime whilst Richard was playing on the other, but Richard was just cycling around. So, thank you very much for that, Richard, because as you say, odd numbers and people having to take a buy is never a good thing. Obviously, it's not always avoidable, but maybe not having somebody play two games at the same time. It's possible under some game systems, but one of the things I like about Meg is that you're always involved in the game. There are always things happening because of the interleaved movement and decisions to make. Other games, where one player might move all their troops and then the other moves all theirs, you can virtually walk away.
It would be much easier, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Meg, it's just that was monumental. So yeah, and in the end, as already mentioned, Simon Hall won with his Iko-Iki, is a Japanese fanatic monk, loopy nutters types with how many units of fanatics has it got? 4, 5, 6, something, and then a lot of absolute dross.
Yeah. So obviously I've got to try and weaken that army somehow.
I think what was distinctly worrying is that Simon's somewhat unwell at the moment and was playing it while really quite under the weather, and he still beat us all.
That's scary.
So maybe not nobbling the army.
Yes, yeah, maybe we should nobble the author.
Well, he was clearly nobbled and he still won with it.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to give up, aren't we? So anyway, that was Foot Sloggers. So I think I think you're right. Everybody enjoyed it. It was different. It's nice to have something different in the calendar. But now we're looking forward to about 3 weeks' time with the next one, which is also hosted by Battlefield Hobbies. God Wills It, a Crusades-ish theme. Not just the Crusades of Outremer, but also including some Eastern European types. Yeah, so I think at least one or maybe two of the armies we've looked at today are eligible for that. Yeah,
and also the armies of Reconquista.
Indeed, that's quite an interesting addition. Adds just a nice twist on the Crusader theme. So, what are we expecting from this, chaps?
To die horribly.
Same, actually. To be honest,
yeah, so Matt, you said you're taking Ottomans.
Yes. I'm taking a slightly suboptimal Ottoman, as there are limits to what you can do with the list because of the Allied restrictions. But
I've decided to take Lusignan Cypriot, so I'm going with Crusaders, sort of. You don't have to declare, Richard.
I've gone for a Christian army in Spain.
Keep it vague. So, as mentioned, Reconquista. So, yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see what variety of armies are taken. Well, states the obvious, doesn't it? We're always interested in seeing what variety of armies are taken. But given there's this slight different twist on the Crusader theme, and I think I would like to mention, because I'm list checking, that assuming this podcast is published before the list due date, the lists are due in by Friday, the 10th of June, folks. So if you're entered, please get me your lists for list checking. And I think there are, for those who haven't entered but might be interested, I think there's a couple of places still available. So feel free to get your entries in. And I do know that various people have said that they're willing to lend armies. So even if you haven't got an army, one can probably be made available to you.
I'm certainly offering most of my Eastern European armies that are in the Teutonic Order list. I've forgotten the name of the damn PDF.
Ostseelen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so,
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, and I'm taking what is basically a Crusader army. So my Muslim army collection is available for loaning as well.
Yeah, I rejected when I was drafting up my possible lists. I tried a medieval Norwegian, but I rejected that as being daft. But if anybody's daft enough to borrow it, they'd be welcome.
Perhaps there's a challenge for somebody who either hasn't submitted their list yet or wishes to enter. Medieval Norwegian. So
there's a parrot joke in there somewhere.
Oh no.
Well, I think there were Jomsvikings, so
well, Norwegians certainly took part in some of the early crusades.
Yeah, there was a Sigurd's crusade, was it?
I think
that's the Jomsvikings. They sailed down from Norway. Famously, they ambushed a Arab ship off Spain, I think off Gibraltar somewhere. Thought they'd stripped it of all its valuables, set light to it, and then saw gold melting the burning wreck.
A bit of an oversight
at that point.
Yeah, I'm sure they were well and truly. So anyway, so that's the next competition. So I think at that point we've probably used up our time. So as ever, thank you very much to Richard and Matt. Matt especially for the history. Definitely learned something tonight. I usually do on these podcasts. It's really good. I hope you, the listener, has as well. Please have a look at the lists we put up. If only just have a laugh at them and see just how dull my lists are compared to the far more interesting ones produced by Matt and Richard. And hopefully we'll be back again soon. So thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.